Hey you, and welcome. In this video, we will learn about data types in JavaScript. In the previous code that we have written, we already used data types and variables. However, now we're going to spend more time learning what they are and how to use them and what scope means in JavaScript. All right, so let's dive right into it. I have my VS Code open. I will do Command-Shift-P and open a Quokka new JavaScript file. The terminal, I don't need it. I'll go ahead and close that. And let's start with the first variable type, which will be string. Now to instantiate variable, you may have seen me call const, give it a name. Let's call it name equals to, and then single quotes for string, and then some value. Let's call it my name. So that's how you instantiate a variable. And I can output that here. Let's do a console log name, and that will give me the name here. Perfect. So that's one type of variable, which is const. That means if I try to make a change later on to say this should be something else and console log, you can already see Quokka is complaining. Assignment to constant variable is not allowed. That's what a constant is. It cannot be changed. Now, if I change it to let, which is the other type of variable, now I'm fine. I can actually see the name in the line number 2 is Azim, whereas line number 4 says something else. That's okay because I changed it to let. The rule of thumb is always keep it to const unless you have to change it to let to make changes to it later on. There is rules for let to be used, but const is the default that you should go with. All right. So that's the string value. There is a keyword type that you can find a type of a variable in JavaScript. So I'll do another console log here, and this is called type of. When you say type of and the variable name after it, after the space, it will tell you what type of variable it is, what type of value does it hold. In this case, it holds a string value, and the value itself is Azim. So that's what the string type would be. Next, we will look at number, which is just a integer. And in this case, it will be set to 1. So we can see line number 2 says 1 and line number 3 says number. Same thing would happen if I was to use it with a decimal point. It's still a number, doesn't really make a difference. There is a big int in JavaScript. I barely use it, so I'm not going to cover that here. But yeah, number values are integer. They don't need single quotes. With numbers, you can do arithmetic operators where we can do another console log here and say name plus name would be equals to 3.6. If I had 1, it would be equals to 2. So you can do some mathematical operators using numbers. Whereas with the string, if you did that, it's allowed, but it works differently. It's just going to keep adding string one after another, so it concatenates based on how many times you ask for it. So just a different approach to what it would be. All right, perfect. So that's number. Next, we have Boolean. So I'll say true or false. Those are Boolean values, and you can see down on line number 3, it does say Boolean, and as I change it, it changes to true or false. Notice that it doesn't have the string, a single quote or double quote, because Boolean is a native type. If I put quote true, it does have the value true, however, the type is string, not a Boolean type. So that's how you work with Boolean, where you can either do true or false. Another type that we have seen before is the object type, where we can start an object, give it a value, A equals to B. Let's go with that. And then here we can see that the object is rendering or outputting, and we can see the type of is object. So that is working just fine. Another type that we're going to cover in the later videos is the array type. So you start with the square brackets, and then it can hold some values. It's a list of values, A, B, C, like so. And notice that it's still an object. Array is still considered an object. So if you want to identify between an object, JSON object, or the array, you have to use something different, not just type of, but it has to be something different. So that is where array functions come in. We'll cover them in more details later on, but in this case, I'll just say is array and pass that as a parameter, like so. And there we go. Now it says true. Now if I was to change it back to the object, A equals to B, you can see how on line number 3, it says false because it's not an array anymore. It's a different type of object. So we can identify what type of data type it would be. There are also some empty data types. For example, we can assign this to null. And let's see what the type of says. Type of name. There we go. It says it's an object, so that's a null value is an object here. We can also assign it to undefined. Notice that undefined is the initial value. If you don't assign a value to a const or a let, by default it is undefined. So if I was to take that away, I think it will complain. Let me see, would it complain if it's let? No. Okay, so if it's let, I can leave it uninstantiated, and you can see that the name is set to undefined and the type of is undefined as well. So we don't really have to say equals to undefined, but if you want to be very explicit, you can of course write that in. There are scenarios where you may instantiate a value. Let's say in this case there's a value, and then let's pass these two down here and let's reassign that to undefined. So there is possibility of you in the program to say, I'm going to initially have a value, but after a certain while, I'm going to set it to undefined. So that's how you take it back, take the value out of some container. Great. Next, let's take a look at some of the logical operators that we can use. Right now, we have been using equals to as an assignment operator. That means whatever is the value on the right-hand side will be assigned to the variable on the left-hand side. That's the default functionality for equals to. However, it is also used as a logical operator where we can compare two values and see whether they match or don't match, or greater than equals to or less than equals to, something like that. So that's what we'll do here. I will just keep the value as is. Let's change it to const. Let's take away the rest of the values. Ooh, did I take that away? Okay, let's take everything away. That's fine. All right, so let's do val equals to value, and then val2 equals to value as well. And if I was to do a console log of val equals val2, you can see how it's true. Equals would allow us to do a strict comparison between the two values. That's the default. We don't use equals, even though it is possible to work with just two equals to sign. We usually do equals. That means it's a strict comparison between the string value. So if I was to change it to say value2 would just be value2. It's a false. That means they don't equal each other, and the same thing can happen when you switch it back. And same thing can happen for numbers. So I can say, does the number 1 equals to value? No, it doesn't. Does number 1 equals to number 1 but in a string type? No, it isn't. So it has to be a strict comparison between the two. Great. We can also do greater than equals to, so we can try here. Or actually, before we do that, let's just do a quick not operator, because that one is very easy. If I replace the first equals to sign to a exclamation mark, bang, some people call it, that would change it to a inverted condition, where it would say, instead of checking for whether they compare to each other or not, check if they don't compare with each other. That means they're different from each other. So you're just changing the value to its opposite. So in this case, when they don't match, it will return true. Whereas if they do match, it will return false. So that's what a not operator would do. Great. Let's try with greater than, so we can see if value 1 is greater than value 2. In this case, it isn't. They're equal to each other. But if I was to change it to 2 over there on the value 1, it is greater, so it works just fine. I can also do greater than equals to. So in this case, if I was to set it back to 1, it's set to true. That means they are at least either equal or greater than each other, right? Similarly, we can do less than to check if value 2 is greater or not, or equals to, or it can be less than. So we can do the same comparison logical operator for these values. All right, perfect. Let's take a look at some of the arithmetic operators for some math in JavaScript, which is of course very valuable. So we already saw that how we can do, actually let's replace these with A and B. It'll be easier to type it. So A plus B gives me 2. That's how you do a plus. A minus B should give me a 0. A multiply would give me 1 because they're multiplying with each other. A divide with each other, and that gives me 1 as well. I can do more formulas to say not only do you do A divide by B, but also do A minus A, and then put more parentheses so you can keep nesting and make your math a little bit more complex, and that would work. So that's how you can pile them on each other and create a formula. Let's take this away. There we are. All right, A plus B. Now there's also a scenario where you may just want to increment a number with itself. So in this case, we will use A plus plus which would, of course, we have to make it so that it's let because we're reassigning the value. So a++ in here would just return a 1 because we're adding a number after it has been called already. That's why it shows 1. But if I was to call it again, it's 2, and then 3, and then 4, and 5. So every time ++ is called, it just keeps incrementing by 1. And if I was to do, instead of ++ after, I do ++ before. Oops, like this, ++. There we go. Now it will change, and I will replace all of these with actual console logs right there. Perfect. So instead of starting with 1, it starts with 2 because we did ++ before we started to console log it out. So that's how you do ++. There's also -, and you can of course go negative numbers. That's perfectly fine. And that's how these arithmetic operators would work. We can also do power to. Let's take all of these away. So we can say a to the power of b, and that would work just fine. Let's change it to 2 and 2 so we can actually see the power 2 to the power of 2, and that's how it would work. And the last one is modulo, which is used to mostly find out the remainder value. Let me show you what I mean. So if I do a modulo b, it will be 0. And the reason why it's 0 is because there's no remainder value left after you have taken the 2 out of another 2. So let me show you what I mean. If I was to put a 10, it will still be 0. And the reason for that is because it will keep adding 2 until it reaches a close number to 10 or 10 itself. In this case, it reached 10. But if I put an 11, it gives me 1 because 2 can only go as far as to make a 10, but it cannot go to make a 11. It will have to pass it to make a 12, which is not possible. So in this case, the remainder is 1. So that's how you can sometimes define a function where you may be able to get a even number versus odd. So you can say if it gives me 0, when I try to do modulo of 2, it will be an even number, whereas if it gives me 1, it is an odd number because it is not divided by 2. All right, that's about it for this video. I'll see you all in the next one.